The drill sergeant slammed her to the ground, his boot pressing into her shoulder as mud soaked through her uniform. "Stay down, Rhodes," he snarled loud enough for the entire unit to hear. "This is why women don't belong in elite combat." The recruits watched in uncomfortable silence as she lay there, humiliated in front of everyone. But then something changed in her eyes. Instead of staying broken, she rose with controlled precision that made even the sergeant hesitate. No one expected what happened next, or the headlines that would end his career forever. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If stories of quiet strength inspire you, subscribe to see more moments when underestimated people change everything. Dawn broke over Fort Callister, a sprawling military training ground nestled in harsh terrain. The facility was infamous for its brutal conditioning program that prepared soldiers for elite combat roles. Morning fog hung low over the obstacle course as recruits assembled for their daily training ritual, the sun barely piercing the haze to cast long shadows across the muddy field. The air carried a distinctive chill, the kind that seeped through regulation clothing and made muscles tighten uncomfortably. 40 recruits stood in perfect formation, breath visible in small clouds, bodies rigid with a mixture of discipline and the simple desire to stay warm. Among them, Astria Rhodes maintained perfect posture despite evident fatigue, her uniform immaculate compared to her mud-spattered colleagues. She was one of only 3 women in the unit, a fact that never went unremarked upon by certain members of the cadre. Nothing about her suggested special status or privilege. Average height, athletic but not exceptionally muscular, no insignias or markings that differentiated her from the others. Only her eyes, scanning the field with unusual focus, hinted at something beyond the ordinary recruit, struggling through another day of grueling training. The unit's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Thorne, observed from a distance, his expression revealing nothing as Drill Sergeant Mercer approached the formation. Mercer moved with the swaggering confidence of a man whose authority had never been questioned, his scarred face and perpetual scowl designed to intimidate. He carried himself like a man who enjoyed the power his position afforded him, particularly the power to break down those he deemed unworthy. "Morning, maggots," he bellowed, pacing before the formation with deliberate, measured steps. His voice carried across the field, designed to project both authority and disdain in equal measure. 14 of you are still here who should have quit weeks ago." His gaze deliberately lingered on Astria, a slight smirk forming at the corner of his mouth. "Some of you are only here because the Pentagon wants to play social justice warrior with our combat readiness." Several male recruits smirked, exchanging knowing glances. The comment landed as intended, reinforcing the unspoken hierarchy that Mercer had cultivated since the beginning of the training cycle. Astria's expression remained neutral, her focus seemingly on a point in the distance beyond Mercer, giving nothing away. "Today's evolution, hand-to-hand combat assessment," Mercer announced, clasping his hands behind his back as he continued to pace. "We need to see who has what it takes to handle themselves when the shooting stops and it comes down to you and the enemy face to face." He stopped directly in front of Astria, his posture intentionally invasive of her personal space. "Rhodes, front and center. Let us see if the women's program has anything to offer besides filling quotas." A ripple of anticipation moved through the formation. These public demonstrations were a regular feature of Mercer's training style, usually designed to reinforce his own dominance and the recruit's submission rather than to teach actual combat skills. Astria stepped forward without hesitation, facing Mercer with composed readiness. If she felt any trepidation at being singled out, she concealed it completely. The other recruits formed a circle around them, their expressions ranging from uncomfortable anticipation to barely concealed amusement. Training circle demonstrations were rarely fair, and everyone knew it. "Rules of engagement, Sergeant?" she asked, her voice steady. "Rules?" Mercer laughed, the sound deliberately theatrical for the benefit of his audience. "Combat has no rules, Rhodes, but I will go easy on you. All you have to do is stay standing for 30 seconds. Among the watching recruits, Farron Isaacs shifted uncomfortably, the only other female recruit in view. Beside her, Recruit Dawson whispered something that made nearby men chuckle. Lieutenant Colonel Thorne's attention sharpened, though he made no move to intervene. His presence at these morning sessions was ostensibly supervisory, but he rarely countermanded Mercer's methods, a fact that the drill sergeant exploited regularly. "Begin!" shouted Mercer, immediately launching into a series of aggressive maneuvers designed to overwhelm. Astria defended capably, her technique solid but not extraordinary. Her movements suggested formal training rather than street fighting, disciplined, controlled by the book. There was nothing in her defense that suggested special capabilities, just adequate military hand-to-hand combat training. "This what they teach women now?" Mercer taunted, easily slipping past her guard with a feint and follow-up that forced her to retreat a step. "How to look pretty while getting your butt handed to you." The circle of recruits had grown silent, the entertainment value of the lesson giving way to discomfort as the one-sidedness became apparent. When Astria successfully blocked a strike, Mercer's expression darkened. He escalated unexpectedly, sweeping her legs with a move that went well beyond the intensity appropriate for a training demonstration, sending her hard to the ground. The impact was audible, forcing air from her lungs as she hit the mud with force that would leave bruises. A few recruits winced involuntarily, the display crossing the line from instruction to humiliation in a way that made even Mercer's usual supporters uncomfortable. 22 seconds, he announced, standing over her with a satisfied expression. "Not even close to combat ready. This is why we do not need diversity quotas in elite units." Astria began to rise, maintaining her composure despite the mud now covering half her uniform and the public embarrassment. Before she could regain her footing, Mercer planted a boot on her shoulder, pressing her back into the mud. "Stay down, Rhodes. Know your place." The training ground fell silent. Even the usual sycophants looked uneasy at this public humiliation that had moved beyond tough training into something personal. Lieutenant Colonel Thorne stepped forward slightly, then hesitated, his authority momentarily paralyzed by the established hierarchy and the potential disruption of intervening. From the ground, covered in mud, Astria's eyes met Thorne's briefly. Something passed between them, not a plea for help, but an unspoken communication that contained more information than should have been possible in a momentary glance. Then her gaze returned to Mercer, who continued to hold her down with his boot, making his point to the watching unit. The pressure from Mercer's boot increased as he leaned forward, his voice pitched to carry to the entire unit. "This is what happens when we let politics dictate military readiness," he announced, clearly enjoying his moment of complete dominance. "Some people simply do not have what it takes, and no amount of sensitivity training will change that reality." Astria remained still beneath his boot, but something had changed in her eyes. The submission Mercer expected was not there. Instead, a focused calculation had replaced it, as though she was making a decision rather than simply enduring humiliation. Her breathing had slowed, becoming more controlled and deliberate, a subtle change that went unnoticed by everyone except perhaps Lieutenant Colonel Thorne, whose attention had not wavered. "Something to say, Rhodes?" Mercer asked, noticing her changed expression. Even he seemed to sense the shift, though he could not identify its nature. "Permission to continue the exercise, Sergeant?" she responded, her voice steady despite her position on the ground. There was no anger in her tone, no hint of the humiliation she should have been feeling, just a calm request that seemed oddly disconnected from the reality of her current situation. Mercer laughed, a sound that did not quite convey the confidence he clearly intended. "Still think you have something to prove? Fine. Let us see what else they taught you in your special program." He removed his boot, stepping back with theatrical magnanimity that did not quite mask his genuine curiosity about what she might try next. Several recruits exchanged glances, sensing that something unexpected was developing in what should have been a routine demonstration of the established order. As Astria rose from the mud, her movements shifted subtly. Gone was the by-the-book technique from before, replaced by a fluid economy of motion that suggested much more advanced training. She did not brush off the mud or show any sign of discomfort or embarrassment. Instead, she settled into a stance that, to the untrained eye, might have appeared similar to her earlier position, but contained fundamental differences that radically altered its effectiveness. Among the watching recruits, one of the men, Recruit Latimer, narrowed his eyes in recognition. "Wait, is she?" he began to whisper to his neighbor, but stopped as Astria fully regained her footing, something in her transformed presence commanding complete attention. "Ready when you are, Sergeant," she said, her voice betraying nothing of what might follow, but her stance told a different story to anyone with the training to recognize it, a story that was just beginning to dawn on a few of the more experienced recruits in the circle. Mercer, not noticing the change, moved in with the same aggressive tactics that had worked moments before. This time, Astria sidestepped with precision that spoke of thousands of hours of practice. Rather than engaging directly, she used his momentum against him, executing a textbook defensive maneuver that maintained her position while forcing Mercer to recover his balance. The move was subtle but effective, the kind taught in advanced close-quarters combat courses rather than basic training. Several of the watching recruits straightened slightly, recognizing the technique even if they could not quite place it. Irritation crossed Mercer's face as his easy victory evaporated. The script had changed without warning, and his audience was witnessing a performance decidedly different from the one he had planned. He increased the intensity, throwing combinations that would overwhelm most recruits at this stage of training. His movements became less instructional and more personally driven, a clear intent to reassert dominance rather than demonstrate technique. Astria responded with defensive techniques that seemed increasingly familiar to some of the watching recruits, especially Latimer, whose expression had transformed from casual interest to stunned recognition. His eyes followed each movement with growing certainty, pieces of a puzzle visibly falling into place in his mind. "Where did you learn that sequence?" Mercer demanded, backing off momentarily. The question was not merely tactical, but betrayed genuine surprise, as though he had recognized something he had not expected to see in this context. "Standard training, Sergeant," Astria replied, her breathing controlled despite the exertion. Nothing in her tone suggested deception, yet the statement clearly did not align with Mercer's understanding of standard recruit preparation. "Bull!" Mercer spat, abandoning any pretense of a training exercise. His next attacks came with full force, designed not to teach, but to hurt, to reassert dominance through superior strength and aggression. The movements crossed the line from demonstration into combat, a distinction not lost on the increasingly uncomfortable recruits watching the exchange. Lieutenant Colonel Thorne took a definitive step forward now, clearly about to intervene, but stopped as Estrella executed a perfect defensive counter that left Mercer momentarily exposed. She did not press the advantage, instead returning to a neutral stance, giving him the opportunity to reset. The restraint was as telling as the technique, suggesting both advanced training and exceptional discipline. This controlled restraint infuriated Mercer more than any attack could have. It represented a challenge to the fundamental power dynamic he had established, not through opposition, but through a demonstration of superior skill and composure. "Stop dancing and fight, Rhodes," he shouted, his composure cracking visibly. The command revealed his growing frustration, exposing a vulnerability that undermined his carefully cultivated image of unassailable authority. "This is a defensive assessment, Sergeant," she replied evenly. "I am following the established protocol for this exercise." Her calm citation of regulations in the midst of what had become a personal attack pushed Mercer over the edge. The reminder of protocol highlighted his departure from it, a public acknowledgement of his loss of professional control that he could not tolerate. He charged forward, abandoning technique for brute force, clearly intent on putting her back on the ground where he believed she belonged. The movement was telegraphed by both his body language and the flash of anger that preceded it, an emotional response rather than a tactical decision. The watching recruits had fallen completely silent now, the entertainment factor gone, replaced by the uncomfortable recognition that they were witnessing something inappropriate. Even Dawson and the other recruits who had been smirking earlier now appeared concerned, sensing the line between training and personal vendetta had been definitively crossed. In the moment before contact, Astria's posture shifted one final time. Her defensive stance transformed into something more advanced, a position familiar to anyone with specialized close-quarters combat training. The stance was not taught in standard military courses, but was reserved for specialized units with specific tactical requirements. When Mercer reached her, instead of being overwhelmed by his superior weight and strength, she redirected his momentum with textbook precision, using his own force against him. The result was as inevitable as it was shocking. Mercer, overcommitted and off balance, found himself thrown forward, landing hard on the same muddy ground where he had humiliated Astria minutes before. The technique was executed with perfect control, designed to neutralize without injury, revealing training far beyond what any recruit should possess. For a moment, The training ground was completely still, the collective breath of 40 recruits held in stunned silence. The reversal was so complete, so unexpected, that no one seemed to know how to respond. Mercer himself appeared momentarily disoriented, as much by the sudden inversion of his expected reality as by the physical impact. He rose from the mud, rage replacing any pretense of professional demeanor. Mud clung to his uniform, a visible symbol of his diminished authority. "You are finished, Rhodes," he snarled. "Pack your bags. You are out of this program." The threat might have carried weight minutes earlier, but now rang hollow in the wake of the demonstration they had all witnessed. Something fundamental had changed in the power dynamic, and everyone present felt it. Before he could continue, Lieutenant Colonel Thorne's voice cut through the tension. "Stand down, Sergeant Mercer." The command was delivered with quiet authority that nonetheless carried across the entire training ground. There was no need to shout. The complete silence that had fallen over the assembly ensured every word was heard distinctly. Thorne approached the circle, his presence immediately altering the dynamic further. The recruits straightened instinctively, responding to the command authority that radiated from him despite his quiet tone. There was a certainty in his movement that suggested he was not responding to unexpected events, but rather to a situation unfolding exactly as anticipated. "Rhodes," Thorne addressed her directly, "identify yourself properly for the unit." The instruction carried significance beyond the words themselves, as though activating a predetermined protocol. Astria's response confirmed this impression, transforming the moment from surprising to deliberate. Astria came to attention, mud still covering half her uniform. Despite the soil and dishevelment, her bearing conveyed absolute military precision. "Captain Astria Rhodes, 5th Special Forces Group, Combat Application Specialist, sir. Currently assigned to the Pentagon's Combat Integration Assessment Task Force." The revelation rippled through the watching recruits. Dawson's jaw literally dropped, the cocky smirk replaced by stunned disbelief. Latimer nodded slightly, his earlier recognition confirmed. Other recruits exchanged glances, processing the implications of what they were hearing. "Captain Rhodes," Thorne continued, "has been embedded with your unit for the past 3 weeks as part of a comprehensive review of training protocols across all elite combat programs. Her assignment was known only to myself and Base Command." This additional information completed the transformation of the narrative. What had appeared to be a public humiliation of a female recruit had been revealed as something entirely different. A professional assessment by a highly qualified officer, specifically tasked with evaluating the training environment. Mercer's face drained of color as the implications became clear. His behavior had not merely been inappropriate toward a recruit, but had constituted insubordination toward a superior officer conducting an official Pentagon assessment. "Sir, I was not informed," he began, his tone a mixture of anger and dawning alarm. "That was the point, Sergeant," Thorne cut him off. "An unbiased assessment required authentic interactions. Captain Rhodes was inserted into this training cycle specifically to experience and evaluate the environment as a recruit would." The strategic brilliance of the approach was not lost on the watching recruits. By embedding an experienced combat officer posing as a recruit, the assessment team had gained unfiltered access to the actual training environment rather than the sanitized version that might have been presented to official observers. Thorne turned to address the entire unit. "Captain Rhodes is not only qualified for this training, but has already completed it, along with advanced courses that most of you will never have the opportunity to take. She has 3 combat deployments and a Silver Star that I suspect none of you have heard about because she does not wear her accomplishments like badges of honor." The information landed with particular impact on those who had been most dismissive of Astria's capabilities. The contrast between their assumptions and the reality created a cognitive dissonance that registered clearly on their faces. Astria maintained perfect military bearing throughout this revelation, neither gloating nor appearing uncomfortable with the attention. Her composure remained exactly as it had been throughout, suggesting that both her earlier apparent submission and her current revealed authority were expressions of the same disciplined character rather than inconsistent behaviors. "Sir," she addressed Thorne, "request permission to continue with the day's scheduled training. The recruits should not lose valuable instruction time." The request revealed priorities focused on mission accomplishment rather than personal vindication, another indicator of professional character that added weight to the revelation of her true identity. "Denied, Captain," Thorne replied. "I believe we have all received sufficient instruction for one day." He turned to Mercer. "Sergeant, my office, immediately." The directive left no room for discussion or delay. As Mercer followed Thorne from the training ground, the dynamic among the recruits transformed completely. The hierarchy that had seemed so firmly established just minutes earlier had been fundamentally reordered, leaving them to process not just the revelation about Captain Rhodes, but also their own behavior in the preceding weeks. As Mercer followed Thorne from the training ground, the dynamic among the recruits transformed completely. Farron Isaacs approached Astria first, stepping forward from the still-stunned group. "You knew all along," she said, not a question, but a realization. Every time he targeted the women in the unit, every lesson about why we do not belong here. "My assessment was not just about Sergeant Mercer," Astria responded quietly. "It was about the entire training culture. Who spoke up, who stayed silent, who enjoyed the show." Her gaze swept across the male recruits, many of whom now found the ground intensely interesting. The mud that had been a symbol of her humiliation minutes before now represented something entirely different. The exposed foundation of a system that had confused cruelty for effectiveness, dominance for leadership, and tradition for merit. Latimer stepped forward, professional curiosity overcoming the awkwardness of the moment. "Fifth group, ma'am?" he asked. "My brother served with them in Syria. He said they had some female operators attached who were the real deal. I am guessing that was your unit?" "I do not discuss operational details, recruit," she responded, but there was a new respect in her tone, acknowledgement of someone who had recognized her skills before the revelation. As the initial shock wore off, the recruits began to process what they had witnessed. The woman they had dismissed, mocked, or pitied had been evaluating them the entire time. Their behavior, their character, their worthiness for the elite positions they sought had been under expert assessment by someone they had underestimated entirely. 1 week later, the training unit assembled on the same field, but the atmosphere was markedly different. A new drill instructor, Sergeant First Class Orion, led the morning exercise with demanding precision, but without Mercer's theatrical cruelty. The standards remained exactly as high, but the methods had shifted from breaking spirits to building warriors. Rumors about Mercer's fate circulated among the recruits. Some said he was reassigned to a remote outpost in Alaska, others that he was forced into early retirement. The truth, as usual, lay somewhere in between. A disciplinary hearing, followed by reassignment to a non-training position, his career effectively stalled. Lieutenant Colonel Thorne addressed the unit, now standing with several other officers including Astria, who wore her full uniform with proper rank insignia for the first time since her arrival. The sight of her decorations and combat patches created a visual reinforcement of the revelation that had transformed the training culture. The purpose of elite training is not to break soldiers, but to build them, Thorne began, his voice carrying across the now silent formation. Somewhere along the way, that fundamental truth was lost at Fort Callister. Captain Rhodes's assessment has given us the opportunity to realign our methods with our actual mission. He outlined changes to the training protocols, emphasizing that standards would remain exactly as high, but the methods of achieving them would focus on building excellence rather than leveraging humiliation. The goal was not to make the program easier, but to make it more effective, producing better warriors through better training. Captain Rhodes will be departing today to submit her final report to the Pentagon's task force, Thorne concluded. Before she goes, I have asked her to share a few words with you. Astria stepped forward, her bearing professional but approachable, the mud and humiliation of the previous week replaced by the unmistakable presence of a combat-tested officer. 3 weeks ago, I arrived as a recruit with the same qualifications as many of you, she began. The only difference was perception, yours and sometimes my own. I was judged not on my capabilities, but on assumptions about what those capabilities must be based on my gender. She scanned the faces before her, making brief eye contact with several recruits who had been particularly dismissive. The directness of her gaze contained no accusation, simply an invitation to recognize the reality of what had occurred. The future of elite combat units depends not just on physical strength or tactical knowledge, but on adaptability, perception, and judgment. Those who could not see beyond their biases missed critical intelligence in the field. Me. In combat, that kind of tunnel vision gets people killed. Her words landed with particular impact on Dawson and the other recruits who had been most vocal in supporting Mercer's behavior. Several shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the professional critique embedded in her observation. "The standards do not change," she continued. "They never should. But our understanding of who can meet those standards must evolve if we want the best possible fighting force. I look forward to serving alongside those of you who complete this training, not as male or female operators, but simply as qualified ones." As she concluded, Latimer initiated something unexpected. He called the unit to attention and offered Astria a sharp, formal salute, a gesture of professional respect, traditionally reserved for significant moments of recognition. One by one, the other recruits joined him, including, after a moment's hesitation, Dawson. The salute spread through the formation until all 40 recruits stood at attention, offering formal acknowledgement to the officer they had failed to recognize. Astria returned the salute with perfect military precision, completing the symbolic circle. What began as humiliation had transformed into professional respect, not demanded, but earned through unimpeachable competence and character. 6 months later, a congressional hearing room buzzed with activity as Astria, now in dress uniform, with her full decorations visible, prepared to testify about the Combat Integration Assessment Task Force's findings. The room was filled with military officials, members of Congress, and media representatives, all gathered to hear testimony that promised to reshape training protocols across all service branches. News headlines appeared on monitors throughout the room, documenting the fallout from her report. Pentagon overhauls, elite training protocols. Following whistleblower report. Fort Callister incident prompts military-wide review of harassment policies. Captain Rhodes' testimony expected to change combat integration standards. Before entering the hearing room, Astria encountered Farron Isaacs, now wearing the insignia of a successfully completed elite training program. The transformation in Farron was evident not just in her uniform, but in her bearing, the confidence of someone who had proven herself against genuine standards. "They are calling it the Rhodes Standard now," Farron told her. "The new assessment protocols at Callister. 17 women have entered the program since you left. 4 of us completed it last month." "And Orion?" Astria asked. "Tough but fair," Farron responded. "The kind of instructor who builds warriors instead of breaking spirits. Latimer says it is the best training in the military now." As they parted ways, Astria's former commanding officer from 5th Group, Colonel Everett, approached. His presence represented a connection to her operational past, a reminder of her identity beyond the assessment role that had brought her to national attention. "Ready for the spotlight, Captain?" he asked. "This testimony will make you the face of the integration effort, for better or worse." "I never wanted to be the face of anything, sir," she responded honestly. "I just wanted the chance to do the job I was trained for." "Sometimes the most important missions find us rather than the other way around," Everett observed. "What happened at Callister has already changed more than you know. 3 other training facilities have quietly removed instructors with similar histories. Sometimes the right person in the wrong situation is exactly what the system needs." As Astria entered the hearing room, the camera pulled back to show young women in military uniforms across the country, watching the live broadcast of her testimony, in barracks, training facilities, and forward operating bases. Female service members gathered around screens, witnessing someone who represented not just possibility, but proven reality. The image carried power beyond words, the visual confirmation that excellence knew no gender, that capability was not determined by category, but by character, training, and opportunity. For many watching, it represented not just a policy change, but a fundamental shift in what was possible for their own careers and contributions. The final shot showed a new training cycle at Fort Callister, where recruits, men and women in equal numbers, faced the same rigorous standards with determined focus. On the training ground where Astria was once pushed into the mud, now stood a simple plaque: "Excellence knows no gender, the Rhodes Standard." The memorial served not as a celebration of one individual, but as a reminder of a principle, a standard to which all training would now be held. It represented a transformation that extended beyond policy into culture, the beginning of change that would ripple through generations of future warriors. Through it all, Astria had never sought recognition. Her goal had been simply to do the job she was trained for, to serve with the excellence and integrity that characterized her career before and after the incident that brought her to public attention. The impact of her actions extended far beyond her intent, creating space for others to achieve their potential without the artificial barriers of bias or tradition. The congressional testimony would make headlines, generate policy changes, and reshape training protocols across military branches. But the true measure of impact would be found in the careers of those who came after her, the generations of service members who would never know what it was like to be judged by anything other than their capabilities and character. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition but deserved more than anyone else? The quiet warriors who change systems from within rarely make headlines, but their impact echoes through generations. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? Share your stories of unsung heroes in the comments below, and subscribe to see more moments when quiet strength changes everything.